Okay, this is Mark Shapiro. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Development at XCures, and I'm joined by Tom Stockwell. We're going to talk about fibrolamellar hepatocellular carcinoma, which is quite a mouthful. But why don't we start, Tom, with you telling me a little bit about Robert?
Well, Robert was a great young man. I mean, obviously, he was unfortunately, he was diagnosed at the age of 18 with this very rare form of liver cancer called fibrolamellar hepatocellular carcinoma. Up to that point, great student, was a big techie guy, just a super great friend, and he was an amazing son. And unfortunately, after he had graduated from high school, he got a job, was going to college, everything was going just terrific for him until he got this flu bug. And the flu bug seemed to last for a few months, and it would come and it would go, but we knew he was really, burning the candle at both ends. So we figured, well, not so big a deal. But he did go to the doctor, his primary doctor. And after a few months had passed, we got to December of 2013, and his belly started to distend, and he ended up getting nauseous, and he felt constipated. And so we said, okay, we need to go back for the third time to the doctor at this point. And so we did, and the doctor finally ordered an ultrasound. He went to get the ultrasound, and within basically 20 minutes of completing that ultrasound, we got a call while we were sitting having lunch, and they told us immediately, drop what you're doing. You need to go to a local ER and have a complete CT scan done. So fast forward to, because it's quite obviously a long story, but for him, he was diagnosed with this cancer. He was sent to a regional center where they performed a biopsy. They discovered a 26-centimeter tumor. They also discovered a tumor that was growing in the right atrium of his heart. And so basically what we were told at the time was take him home. He has 6 weeks to live. And, you can imagine the shock and how stunned we were. I remember that day. It was January 13th, 2014. It was a Monday. And we were so stunned, we couldn't get up and leave that little office cubicle for over 2 hours. So obviously we thought, well, what is fibrolamellar? We had no idea, no clue. And the doctors didn't seem really confident into knowing what to do with the idea of, take him home. I mean, they did try to refer us to another children's hospital at the time. And still there was no answers or anything of this nature. Well, obviously I'm someone that is a never say die, will not give up. Robert, same way. And so I started calling around to multiple places, and we ended up finally finding a doctor who took a shine to Robert, took a shine to our case. He ended up with a life-saving transplant where they removed a 31-centimeter tumor. This happened on President's Day of 2014. He had open heart surgery at the same time. And surprisingly, 28 days later, he left that hospital with a flat belly and feeling good, and had a lot of hope in his fight that he would be able to beat this cancer. And so over the next three and a half years, roughly, that's what we did. And that started the ball rolling on so many things, and where I learned so much about fibrolamellar, because after all, what would a dad not do for their child, right? I mean, there was no stone left unturned as to what we were going to try and do for our son. So through that whole process, it was quite a learning process, and so that's where we were. And sadly, March of 2017, Robert had passed away from this cancer.
It's a really puzzling story. I'm sure you spent a lot of time thinking about, what could have been done differently, and I imagine that must be very difficult. When you finally went to the hospital and they saw this mass, what was your experience with doctors trying to diagnose it? Did they know what fibrolamellar was? Did you have to go to a different specialist?
Well, what we did is obviously the primary care physician had no idea. Then we went to a local ER that was about 15 miles away from our home, and they just knew of this large mass, and that was it. And so no idea of fibrolamellar had even entered anyone's mind at that point. Then we were sent from there. We had an emergency appointment scheduled for the following day at a regional larger medical center. And when we went there, that's when, another set of scans, complete labs, and they also performed a biopsy. And it was in that biopsy that came back that determined, based on not only the scans and how they looked, but also this biopsy, that's what confirmed fibrolamellar. Now, the initial surgeon and the oncologist group at this regional center knew somewhat about fibrolamellar, but in their lifetime had maybe seen one case and just had literature that they had looked at. And back then the literature was vague and there really wasn't a lot of direction. And thus, that's where they said, go home. We give them 6 weeks or so, and that was it. And so that was their initial response.